In the winter of 1944, as the world's eyes turned to the battlefields of France and the Eastern Front, a far smaller, quieter war was taking place in the mountains of northern Italy. Few outside military intelligence circles knew its name, Operation Tombola. It was one of the most daring British SAS missions of the Italian campaign, and one that would end cloaked in snow, silence, and mystery. The plan was deceptively simple: disrupt German communication lines behind the Gothic Line, the last formidable defensive barrier across the Apennines. The target was deep in occupied territory, where the Wehrmacht's 14th Army relied on its network of field headquarters and supply convoys snaking through the valleys between Bologna and Modena. A small, elite force would parachute into the Italian Alps, link up with local partisans, and strike hard at German command posts before slipping back into the wilderness. On the night of March 3, 1944, a Halifax bomber of No. 148 Squadron droned through the icy wind high above the Alps. In the darkness of its belly stood a dozen men of the Special Air Service, British, Scottish, and a few Italian volunteers trained by the SAS in Brindisi. Among them was Captain Michael Lees, a Cambridge graduate turned commando officer who had already survived multiple clandestine missions behind enemy lines. Each man carried a Sten gun, a revolver, and just enough rations to last a week. Strapped to their chests were the parachutes that would drop them into one of the most treacherous landscapes of the war. But almost as soon as the green light flicked on, the operation began to unravel. Fierce alpine winds caught the men as they leapt, scattering the group across miles of rugged, snowbound terrain. Parachutes drifted into ravines and pine forests. Some men landed safely. Others hit the slopes hard, losing radio equipment and supplies in the drifts. The team's wireless operator, Sergeant Alan Smith, broke his ankle on landing, his set destroyed on impact. When dawn broke, the mountains were eerily quiet except for the distant echo of artillery fire to the south. For days, the soldiers fought to regroup. Moving through waist-deep snow, they navigated by compass and sheer instinct, their rations dwindling fast. German patrols roamed the valleys below, hunting for partisans and enemy parachutists. Every fire, every footprint in the snow could give them away. The SAS men relied on the kindness and courage of Italian villagers who risked execution to hide them. In the hamlet of Legonchio, an old farmer named Matteo offered them shelter in his hayloft. He would later write in a hidden diary, "They come from the sky, these Englishmen. They bring courage, but also death if they are found." One night, as a blizzard swept down from Monte Cusna, Captain Lees and his remaining men huddled in an abandoned shepherd's hut. The mission's radio silence was complete. They had no way of knowing whether the rest of the team had survived, or if headquarters even knew their fate. In the dim light of a single candle, Lees made a note in his field journal. "The snow hides us, but it also buries us. We must move by instinct alone." From a tactical perspective, the situation was desperate. Without radio contact, the men could neither call for resupply nor coordinate attacks. Yet turning back was not an option. To return through enemy lines meant certain capture. Their only chance was to press deeper into the mountains, locate their objective, and hope to re-establish contact with partisans who might guide them to safety. The Alps had become their enemy, a vast, white labyrinth concealing both refuge and ruin. Historians now believe this moment, those few days lost in the snow, marked the true turning point of Operation Tombola. Some intelligence files declassified decades later revealed confusion at Allied command. Multiple teams had been dropped in different sectors, with conflicting coordinates and overlapping objectives. Whether by miscommunication or design, the SAS unit led by Lees was effectively on its own. For modern viewers, the lesson resonates beyond wartime tactics. Even the most elite, highly trained forces are vulnerable not just to enemy fire, but to the chaos of nature and the limits of human coordination. In warfare, as in life, a single error in planning can spiral into catastrophe and silence. As the snowstorm raged through the night, Lees and his remaining men packed their gear and prepared to move out at dawn. They did not yet know that only a fraction of the team had survived the drop, nor could they guess that some of their comrades, missing in those same mountains, would never be found, their fates frozen in time beneath the alpine snow. Ahead of them lay miles of hostile territory, cut off from command and hunted by German patrols. Behind them, the howling wind erased their tracks, as if the mountains themselves meant to swallow them whole. The mission was far from over, but already, Operation Tombola had taken on a darker, more uncertain tone. What began as a precision strike had become a struggle for survival, and the first whispers of a mystery that would remain unsolved for decades to come. By the second week of March 1944, the scattered men of Operation Tombola were ghosts moving through the Italian Alps, unseen, unheard, and uncertain if anyone else from their unit was still alive. Captain Michael Lees led the survivors north toward the Serchio Valley, where partisan groups had been reported active. Their mission was no longer sabotage, it was survival. The terrain was merciless. Snow still blanketed the peaks, and frozen rivers cut off their routes at every turn. The small group, Lees, Corporal Bill McLaren, and 3 Italian SAS train operatives, survived on scraps of bread and what little game they could snare. They moved mostly at night, the glow of enemy patrol fires occasionally flickering in the distance. The Germans, alerted by reports of parachutes, had intensified their sweeps through mountain villages, questioning locals and burning barns in retribution. Each day brought the same dread: the crunch of boots in snow, the hum of engines below in the valleys, the distant whistle of German sniffer dogs. The SAS men relied entirely on the kindness and bravery of civilians. In one small village, a schoolteacher named Giulia Farini risked her life to pass messages between the British and local partisans. Her diary, discovered decades later in the archives of Reggio Emilia, recorded the encounter. They were tired, hollow-faced, polite. One of them smiled and thanked me for a piece of stale bread. I thought, these are not soldiers, these are shadows. It was through Giulia that Lees first learned of a nearby partisan band led by a former Italian officer, Lieutenant Lupo Montanari. The partisans operated in the valleys east of the Appian Alps, harassing German convoys on the Lucca-Medina road. Montanari's group offered shelter, but even among allies, trust came slowly. British intelligence officers had warned SAS men to be cautious. Infiltration by fascist spies was common, and entire partisan units had been wiped out by betrayal. When Lees and Montanari finally met, it was inside a Camelot stable. Both men understood the stakes. The British needed guides, supplies, and local intelligence. The partisans needed weapons and the promise of Allied support. A bond was formed, fragile but essential. Over bottles of rough wine and a shared map spread across the hay, they plotted routes, marked enemy checkpoints, and identified a suspected German HQ near Barga, hidden inside a commandeered villa. Yet even as cooperation deepened, danger tightened around them. A patrol of Italian fascist troops discovered a burned-out parachute near Legonchio, a clue that British commandos were nearby. Within days, the area was crawling with German Jebergjäger, mountain troops, veterans of the Eastern Front, accustomed to fighting in the snow. The hunter had become the hunted. Lees recorded his growing anxiety in his journal. We have lost our radio. We have lost our bearings. The men look to me for direction, but I feel we are drifting through fog, both literal and strategic. His words capture the essence of clandestine warfare in the mountains. A battle not just against the enemy, but against isolation, hunger, and the creeping despair of being forgotten by one's own side. Meanwhile, back in Brindisi, British Special Operations Headquarters received incomplete reports of the Tombola drops. Messages from Italian contacts mentioned a British team operating west of the Gothic Line, but no confirmation of survival. Bureaucracy and wartime confusion buried the urgency under piles of encrypted cables. Officially, the men were missing, pending confirmation. In the hills above Barga, the survivors pressed on, guided by partisans through forests where every shadow could conceal a German rifle. They witnessed reprisals that shook their morale. Villages torched, civilians shot for aiding the resistance. For Lees, it was no longer a mission of sabotage. It was a fight to justify the cost of their presence. From a broader historical view, This stage of Operation Tombola illustrates one of the most overlooked aspects of Allied strategy in Italy: the dependence on irregular warfare and the fine line between cooperation and chaos. The SAS, trained for precision raids, found themselves drawn into the messy, human world of resistance warfare, where loyalty was bought not with orders, but with trust. As spring approached, the thawing snow revealed old parachutes tangled in trees and equipment scattered across ravines. Lees wondered whether some of his men still lay out there, frozen beneath the drifts. The locals spoke in whispers about the English spirits in the mountains. He corrected them once, saying quietly, "Not spirits, soldiers." But the irony was not lost on him. In every village they passed, they left behind nothing but footprints and rumors. By the end of March, the group had re-established partial contact with the partisans and learned of a new opportunity: a German field headquarters operating from a villa near the town of Albania. A potential target, a second chance to fulfill their mission. As Lees folded his map and prepared the men for another march into the unknown, he couldn't know that this new objective would drag them even deeper into mystery. The snow had melted, but the fog of war had only thickened, and in that fog, men and missions alike could vanish without a trace. By early April 1944, Captain Michael Lees and his remaining men had made contact with the Allied partisans operating around the upper Reggio Emilia valleys. Through a network of mountain couriers, the SAS learned of a new German command post, a regional headquarters rumored to be housed inside a grand villa outside Albania. The villa, surrounded by cypress trees and guarded by Waffen-SS troops, served as a key relay point between the German 14th Army and their northern divisions. For Lees, this was the chance to complete what Operation Tombola had set out to achieve: strike deep behind enemy lines and cripple German communications. But uncertainty loomed. The intelligence they received came through multiple partisan channels, each story slightly different. Some claimed the villa was a communications hub. Others said it was an officer's rest house. One informant, a captured German driver who had escaped a partisan ambush, insisted that the building contained an underground signals room. Whether true or not, the target was too significant to ignore. Weeks of reconnaissance followed. Lees dispatched small teams of partisans and SAS scouts to map the roads, note guard rotations, and observe the comings and goings of German officers. The reports were encouraging, but inconsistent. Some claimed to have seen high-ranking officers entering the villa. Others swore it was nearly empty at night. And the longer they observed, the more it seemed that someone, somewhere, was leaking information. Partisan radio operators intercepted fragments of German transmissions that hinted at Allied presence in the mountains. The Gestapo had intensified searches in nearby villages, and a local collaborator had been seen asking questions about English parachutists. Lees began to suspect that their operation had been compromised before it even began. In his pocket diary, he wrote a short line that historians often quote today: "The mountain listens to everything. Even our silence carries." It captured not only his fear of betrayal, but the eerie tension that hung over every mission in occupied Italy, where the enemy was often invisible and information could kill faster than bullets. The decision to proceed with the attack was not taken lightly. Lees knew that without secure radio contact, he had no way to coordinate with higher command or call for extraction. But morale among his men was fragile. They needed a purpose, something to make their suffering mean something. He gathered them in a barn near Carpenetti, spread the map across a crate, and pointed to the circled location of the villa. "This," he said quietly, "is why we're here. We hit them fast, we hit them clean, and we get out." The plan, though simple, relied entirely on surprise. The SAS would strike the villa at night with small arms, grenades, and support from a handful of Italian partisans. If successful, they would destroy the communications center and retreat into the hills before dawn. But even as Lees finalized the details, the weather worsened. Heavy rain turned the mountain paths into rivers of mud, grounding any potential air support or supply drops. The men carried on, improvising weapons from captured German grenades and salvaged ammunition. Meanwhile, in London and Brindisi, confusion reigned. Allied headquarters had received no contact from the Tombola team for weeks. Some reports placed them near Medina. Others suggested they'd been wiped out. A decrypted German message referred to enemy saboteurs captured near Reggio. Historians later found that message was a misidentification. The prisoners were Italian partisans, but at the time, it reinforced the belief that the SAS had been lost. No rescue attempt was made. This bureaucratic silence would later fuel speculation that the team had been deliberately left in the field for intelligence-gathering purposes, a theory never officially confirmed. Some intelligence historians argue that the confusion may not have been accidental at all. It may have been part of a larger deception strategy designed to keep German command uncertain about Allied intentions in northern Italy. Lees, of course, knew none of this. For him, the silence from headquarters was simply another burden to bear. But the men sensed it too, the growing feeling that they were forgotten, expendable, ghosts operating in a mission whose purpose even they no longer fully understood. Still, they moved forward. Each night, the sound of German convoys rumbled through the valley roads below, a constant reminder that time was running out. If they waited too long, the Germans might relocate or reinforce the villa, making it impossible to strike. On the night of March 26th, a courier arrived from Montanari's partisan network with fresh intelligence. The villa had recently hosted a senior German communications officer, Oberst Heinrich Riegler. The opportunity was too good to miss. Lees called for the operation to proceed within 48 hours, despite worsening weather and mounting doubts about their intelligence. From a modern perspective, this decision marks a critical inflection point, where courage, necessity, and the fog of war converged. The SAS men were experts in tactical operations, but they were now navigating a landscape shaped by misinformation and isolation. It's a stark reminder of how even elite forces can become pawns in the chaos of wartime intelligence. As the team prepared their weapons and checked their dwindling ammunition, the wind howled through the mountain passes. The villa lights flickered in the valley below, the faint pulse of an enemy unaware, or perhaps waiting. Captain Lees looked out across the dark ridges and whispered to his sergeant, "After tomorrow, we'll either be heroes or we'll vanish." Neither man could have known how prophetic those words would prove to be. The night of March 27th, 1945, was one of those alpine nights when the cold feels alive, biting, whispering, testing every nerve. The snow had stopped, but a heavy mist rolled through the valleys of Reggio Emilia, cloaking everything in ghostly white. For Captain Michael Lees and his men, this was both a blessing and a curse. It offered concealment, yes, but also confusion. Visibility dropped to mere yards as they moved toward their target, the villa outside Albania, believed to house a German command post. Lees led a mixed force of about 30, a handful of surviving SAS commandos, Italian partisans from Montanari's band, and a few escaped Allied prisoners who had joined them. They carried Sten guns, Bren light machine guns, grenades, and demolition charges packed into canvas satchels. The plan was precise: infiltrate, strike the communications center, destroy enemy vehicles, and vanish into the mountains before dawn. But almost from the beginning, something felt wrong. As they descended through the woods above the villa, Lees noticed faint glimmers of light on a nearby ridge, the telltale flicker of German lanterns. Patrols. He motioned for silence, signaling the men to take cover. For nearly an hour, they lay still in the snow while the enemy passed within meters, boots crunching, dogs sniffing the air. The Germans moved on, but the sound of distant engines, trucks perhaps, echoed from the valley floor. The timing was off. Someone had tipped them off, or else the Germans were expecting trouble. Nevertheless, Lees pressed on. At 0100 hours, they reached the perimeter fence of the villa. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and pine smoke. Through the fog, they could see the silhouettes of parked vehicles and the outline of the grand two-story structure, its windows darkened but faint movement visible inside. Lees gave the signal. The first grenades shattered the night. Explosions ripped through the courtyard as the SAS stormed the building, shouting in English and Italian. Tracers lit up the fog, red and white streaks cutting through the gloom. German sentries scrambled for cover, returning fire with MP-40 submachine guns. The fight was brutal, close, and chaotic. Lees and McLaren breached the villa's main hall, where a group of officers had been dining. Amid the confusion, Lees hurled a grenade into the radio room, destroying the transmitters in a single deafening blast. For a brief, electrifying moment, it seemed the mission might actually succeed. But then the counterattack came. From the rear of the estate, German reinforcements poured in, SAS troops, alerted by the initial explosions. Within minutes, the courtyard became a killing ground. The SAS and partisans were forced to fall back toward the tree-line under heavy machine gun fire. Lees was hit in the shoulder, but refused to stop. McLaren dragged a wounded partisan to safety as German flares lit up the night sky. Radio silence was absolute. Their set had been lost in the snow hours earlier. No air support, no extraction, just the sound of shouted German commands and the relentless stutter of automatic fire. The fog, which had once protected them, now made coordination impossible. Men were separated, disoriented. Some retreated toward the hills. Others vanished into the dark ravines below. By 0300 hours, the firefight had subsided. The villa was burning, flames licking through shattered windows, its roof collapsing under the weight of the bombardment. Lees gathered what remained of his team, fewer than 10 men, and ordered withdrawal north. They left behind several wounded who could not be moved. Later partisan accounts tell of the Germans executing prisoners at dawn, lining them up against the wall of the villa's courtyard. Among the dead, they claimed, were 2 British soldiers, their identification tags missing. Their bodies were never officially recovered. Lees and the survivors stumbled through the forests of Monte Kusna for 2 days, pursued by German patrols. Exhausted, frostbitten, and half-starved, they sought refuge in a shepherd's hut high in the mountains. It was there that Lees, bleeding and feverish, wrote his final entry before losing consciousness. "We hit them hard, but something was wrong. They knew we were coming. This mountain keeps secrets, and we are among them now." From a historical perspective, this ambush remains one of the enduring mysteries of Operation Tombola. Some historians suggest the Germans had intercepted partisan radio traffic days before the raid, allowing them to prepare. Others believe a local collaborator betrayed the SAS route to the Gestapo in Reggio. Official British archives released in the 1980s offer no definitive proof, only fragments of coded messages that end abruptly after March 27th. For modern analysts, it's a textbook example of how intelligence leaks and communication breakdowns can doom even the most daring operations. Trust, essential in joint resistance missions, was both weapon and weakness. One false move, one loose word, could destroy an entire unit. As the storm clouds gathered over the Italian Alps that spring, the surviving SAS men faded once again into legend. Their radio remained silent, their comrades' fates unknown. The mountains held their secrets well, and those who tried to uncover them would find only traces: a burned villa, a few scattered shell casings, and the haunting question that would echo for decades: who betrayed Operation Tombola? When the guns fell silent and the snows melted from the Apennines in May 1945, the Allied advance rolled north through Italy. Towns were liberated, fascist banners torn down, and prisoners freed. But in the high valleys of Reggio Emilia, the ghosts of Operation Tombola lingered. Of the SAS unit that had dropped into the Italian Alps months earlier, several men remained unaccounted for. Their names appeared on British records as missing, presumed dead. Yet among local partisans, stories persisted, stories of survivors who vanished into the mountains, and of secrets buried beneath the snow. In the confusion of the war's end, little effort was made to investigate. The SAS was already redeploying to Northern Europe, and official attention shifted to the crumbling German front. Captain Michael Lees, badly wounded but alive, was evacuated by partisans and eventually reached Allied lines near Bologna. His reports, written in trembling handwriting from a field hospital, offered only fragments: the failed assault, the fog, the scattered retreat. Several of his men, including Corporal McLaren and Sergeant Alan Smith, were never found. Lees was promoted for his bravery, but privately haunted by guilt. In a letter to his family, he wrote, "We did what we could. The mountain kept the rest." For decades, this would remain the only first-hand account of what truly happened to the villa near Albania. The official investigation, conducted by British intelligence in late 1945, was brief and inconclusive. The report noted that enemy interference and lack of communication likely caused the operation's breakdown. Yet it also contained a troubling detail. Intercepted German documents referred to the capture of 3 British saboteurs, none of whom ever appeared on prisoner lists. Their fate, execution, disappearance, or escape was never verified. Then, in 1972, an unexpected discovery reignited interest in the mission. A group of Italian hikers exploring the slopes near Monte Cusna stumbled upon a rusted metal box half buried in the soil. Inside were corroded fragments of a British radio set, a broken wristwatch stopped at 2:17, and a pair of dog tags belonging to Corporal W. McLaren, 2nd SAS. Forensic analysis confirmed their authenticity, but offered no answers as to how they ended up there, over 20 kilometers from the reported battle site. The find drew the attention of British war historians, who began to re-examine Operation Tombola's files. Declassified documents from the Public Record Office revealed inconsistencies, 2 versions of the mission plan, differing coordinates for the drop zone, and a missing page from Lee's original report. One historian, Dr. Peter Malloy, wrote in his 1984 study Ghost Patrol, The Lost SAS of Italy, either the plan changed at the last minute without all teams being informed, or there was a deliberate decision to obscure what really happened. Meanwhile, in Italy, surviving partisans began to speak more openly. An aging fighter named Antonio Lupo Montanari, the same man who had fought beside Lee's, gave an interview to La Repubblica in 1975. His words were startling. There was a traitor among us. Someone told the Germans the time of the attack. I saw the signal flares before we reached the villa. They were waiting for the English. Montanari refused to name the suspect, claiming the man had disappeared after the war. Whether this was truth, rumor, or a product of memory clouded by decades of guilt remains uncertain. Still, whispers of betrayal began to circulate in veteran circles. Some believed that British intelligence had intentionally allowed the mission to proceed, knowing it was compromised, to conceal the existence of a separate, more sensitive objective, one involving German cipher couriers operating through northern Italy. It was, after all, common practice for Allied deception units to mask intelligence operations beneath the cover of conventional raids. Yet, officially, no such parallel mission ever existed. For those who survived, the years after the war brought little closure. Captain Lee's return to England, resumed civilian life, and later published memoirs that carefully avoided mention of the full extent of Operation Tombola's losses. There are things, he wrote, that should remain on the mountain. He died in 1992, taking many of those secrets with him. To this day, small memorials, the trails of the Italian Alps, plaques engraved in both English and Italian, honoring the brave men of the SAS and the partisans who fought at Albania. Local villagers still tell of parachutes found in spring thaws, or of British gear uncovered by shepherds in the upper valleys. Each discovery raises more questions than answers. From a historian's perspective, Tombola remains a case study in how the line between heroism and futility can blur under the weight of secrecy. When operations go dark, literally and bureaucratically, history fills the gaps with speculation, rumor, and myth. And yet, in the silence of those mountains, the evidence remains stubbornly incomplete. 3 names never marked Kia, no graves, and a trail of documents redacted beyond recognition. Whatever happened to those missing SAS men after the failed assault is still unknown. But perhaps that's how Lee's intended it. Their story not one of resolution, but of sacrifice left unspoken. For in every war, there are missions that succeed in silence and those that vanish in it. Operation Tombola was both. Nearly 80 years have passed since the snow-covered peaks of the Italian Alps echoed with the gunfire of Operation Tombola. Yet, even today, historians, military researchers, and descendants of the men involved continue to chase its unanswered questions. Who betrayed the mission? Why were the SAS scattered so far from their drop zone? And why do the surviving records, the ones declassified decades later, still conceal more than they reveal? In the early 2000s, renewed archival research brought fresh attention to the operation. A series of coded dispatches found in the National Archives in Kew, London, hinted that Operation Tombola may not have been solely about sabotage. One decrypted message, dated February 1945, referred cryptically to SIGINT interception along courier route Gothic North. To intelligence analysts, this suggested a far more ambitious goal: capturing German communication couriers moving through northern Italy, men who carried encryption codes and cipher tables vital to the enemy's coordination with the Eastern Front. If true, it meant that Captain Lees and his team were part of a broader intelligence gambit, one designed not merely to blow up a headquarters, but to intercept the Reich's military communications as the Allies prepared their final offensive. And if the Germans suspected this, their ambush of the SAS could have been an intentional trap, meant to protect those courier lines at all costs. Modern historians remain divided. Some believe the operation's confusion was simply the result of bad weather, poor coordination, and the chaos of late-war Italy. Others suspect deliberate misdirection, that the SAS team was sent in as a diversion, buying time for an unseen intelligence network working elsewhere in the Apennines. In the absence of full documentation, both theories hold weight. One British historian, Colonel Richard Jennings, summed it up in his 2011 lecture at Sandhurst: "Every war has its mysteries. The difference here is that the truth about Tombola lies not in what we can prove, but in what was deliberately erased." In Italy, local historians have pieced together their own perspective. They argue that the betrayal Moninari spoke of may have been less about treachery and more about desperation. The partisans, under constant threat, sometimes made deals with German officers to protect their villages. A few misplaced words, a delayed message, or a forced confession under torture could have given the enemy just enough to prepare. No one, they say, needed to intend a betrayal. Wars simply crushed people until they broke. Even now, remnants of the operation continue to surface. In 2018, mountaineers discovered human remains near Passo dell'Abitone, close to where the original SAS drop occurred. Among the bones were fragments of a British-made pistol grip and a corroded cap badge of the Special Air Service, the winged dagger barely recognizable under decades of frost. DNA testing linked the remains to a Scottish commando, likely one of Lees's missing men. The Italian government held a ceremony in Reggio Emilia the following year, where both Italian and British flags were lowered side by side. Yet the identity of two others, those listed as missing, remains unknown. Perhaps that's fitting. Some stories, especially those born in the fog of war, refuse to resolve neatly. Operation Tombola stands as one of those, a mission born of courage, ended in confusion, and remembered in fragments. Its legacy is not just in the tactical daring of a few men, but in the lesson it leaves for those who study war, that intelligence and sacrifice are often inseparable, and that truth in warfare is rarely a clean ledger. For the older generation of veterans, Tombola's story resonates with a painful familiarity, the knowledge that bravery does not always bring clarity. For younger historians and soldiers, it offers a humbler reminder that the cost of secrecy is sometimes the truth itself. As the winds still whistle through the pine forests of the Apennines, the last witnesses are gone. Yet the land remembers: the rusted shell casings, the hidden trails, the faint echoes of parachutes landing in the snow. The mountains that once hid the SAS now guard their final secret. Operation Tombola remains, to this day, both a triumph of courage and a question left unanswered. And perhaps, in the long silence that follows war, that is how it was always meant to be.